When people hear the claim that China could have legally occupied Japan after World War II, the first reaction is usually disbelief. It sounds exaggerated, dramatic, maybe even nationalistic. Yet the argument does not spring from thin air. Can China, like the United States, occupy Japan today? Well, it depends. Hi everyone, welcome back to Difference Frames the World, a channel that offers a unique perspective on global events. We analyze big international moves in straightforward words and upload videos daily. Today, Clara would like to discuss whether China can station its army in Japan as the US does nowadays. Since the new Prime Minister of Japan has explicitly stated her intention to intervene in Taiwan affairs by deploying the self-defense forces to defend Taiwan in the event of a military takeover by Beijing, the relationship between Japan and China has reached its lowest point in decades. On China's internet, people are talking that China has the right to occupy Japan as a winner of the Second World War, and Beijing can send troops to the Japan proper if the Japanese government wants to remilitarize its country, posing a threat to East Asia again. Chinese netizens share such views on various social media platforms, and an increasing number of them are yearning to occupy Japan in the near future. Will it come true as the Chinese claimed? The answer is yes and no, or it depends. The claim that China can occupy Japan as a winner is rooted in the wartime agreements among the Allies, the Japanese surrender documents, and the geopolitical plans for postwar Asia, many of which were drawn up long before the war ended. The world has undergone significant changes in the past 80 years. International laws have evolved significantly, and China itself has undergone substantial transformation since 1945. Let us carefully break down this story step by step, using clear and straightforward language. First, let us turn our eyes to December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the very moment that changed history. Japan's plan was straightforward: cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet, break the oil embargo, and force Washington into a negotiated settlement. What they didn't expect was that attacking the U.S. would bring the full force of American industry capacity, more than 10 times Japan's, directly into the war. Before that, the US had been playing a balancing act, providing weapons to Britain, supporting China, and trying to protect its own interests without going fully into combat. Pearl Harbor gave President Franklin Roosevelt what he needed: a clear, emotional, moral reason to enter the war without hesitation. From that moment on, Japan's defeat became a question of when and how, not if or whether. The Allies held significant advantages at that time. Germany was bogged down in the Soviet Union. Italy was in a state of collapse. Japan's early victories across Southeast Asia could not be maintained due to its limited resources. By 1943, the tide had completely turned. Germany suffered catastrophic losses at Stalingrad. Italy ousted Mussolini. And in the Pacific, the Battle of Midway shattered Japan's offensive power. It was the backdrop for one of the most consequential wartime gatherings, the Cairo Conference. In November 1943, the Republic of China, the United States of America, and the Great Britain met in Cairo to determine Japan's fate. The resulting Cairo Declaration laid out some blunt principles. Japan must return all territory taken from China since 1894, including Taiwan. Japan must give up all territories seized by aggression. The Allies would continue military operations until Japan surrendered. It was the Allies' first unified statement about how Japan would be dealt with. 2 years later, in 1945, with Germany defeated, the major Allied powers issued the Potsdam Declaration, which Japan ultimately accepted as binding. Article 8 of the Potsdam Declaration was especially important. The terms of the Cairo Declaration shall be carried out. Japan's sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, Shikoku, and minor islands as we determine. The wording, as we determine, reflected the Allies' right to administer, occupy, and even divide Japan as they felt necessary. Which means Allied powers had full legal authority to divide Japan into occupation zones, exactly as they had done in Germany. And originally, that's exactly what they planned, a four-power occupation. Few people today realize this, but early Allied planning did not envision a single occupation of Japan by the United States. The plan resembled the occupation of Germany, which had 4 zones: American, British, Soviet, and French. For Japan, the initial Allied concept also involved 4 powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and China. That's right, China was planned as one of the 4 military occupiers of post-war Japan. According to early war planning documents, the Soviet Union would occupy Hokkaido and Japan's northeast. The United States would take eastern Honshu, including Tokyo. The United Kingdom would administer western Honshu and Kyushu. China would occupy Shikoku, exercising complete control over the island in all aspects, including military, administrative, and political matters. Even Tokyo itself, the capital of Japan, was initially planned for joint 4-power administration. In this early framework, China was not a second-tier participant. It was a full, equal victor power, with legal rights to station troops, establish bases, and administer Japanese territory. If this plan had gone forward, Chinese troops would have landed on Shikoku in late 1945, just as U.S. troops landed in Tokyo and British troops entered Kyushu. Alongside the U.S., the U.K., and the Soviet Union, China was officially designated as one of the 4 major Allied powers, a status formally recognized by the creation of the United Nations. Some Westerners may argue that China was weak and could not be one of the 4 Allied powers, which is wrong. China withheld the Japanese for 14 years, unlike France, which surrendered in 14 days when German troops arrived. By the time Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, China had already been fighting Japan since 1931, suffering enormous casualties. The scale of Chinese losses and the length of the resistance impressed Roosevelt and Churchill enough that they viewed China as a major stakeholder in the post-war settlement. The U.S., in particular, believed that giving China a role in post-war Japan would help maintain balance in Asia and prevent Soviet expansion, as the leader of China at that time was the nationalist, not the communist. On September 2, 1945, Japan formally signed the Instrument of Surrender, in which it explicitly accepted the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. From a legal standpoint, Japan had accepted that China, as one of the victors, could send occupation forces into designated zones. China's nationalist government had selected occupation units, appointed officers, chosen civilian administrators, gathered translators familiar with Japan, and even drafted detailed plans for administering Shikoku. However, Chiang Kai-shek made a strategic choice, and it turned out to be one of the most consequential decisions in modern East Asian history. Instead of deploying forces to Japan, he redirected nearly all troops toward northeast China to fight the communist forces. He viewed the Civil War as the existential struggle that would determine control of China. In his view, allocating forces to Japan would reduce his advantage at home. He did not station the Chinese troops in Japan as planned. The presence of Soviet troops fundamentally shaped Eastern Europe for decades. Had China administered part of Japan, the political map of East Asia could have been radically different. When the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, the nationalist government escaped to Taiwan. Under normal circumstances, the new government would inherit all international rights, responsibilities, and entitlements of the previous government, including the right to participate in the post-war occupation of Japan. But history had other plans, as the Cold War had begun. The U.S. and its allies refused to recognize the People's Republic of China, a stance supported by the Soviet Union. Washington had no intention of allowing a communist-led China to administer any part of Japan, especially when Japan had suddenly become America's most important strategic ally in the Pacific. So the U.S. moved quickly. In 1951, the United States and Japan signed the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which ended the Allied occupation, recognized Japan's sovereignty, allowed the U.S. to maintain military bases, and officially excluded China from the settlement. Neither Beijing nor Taipei was invited to station troops in Japan. The Soviet Union refused to sign the San Francisco Peace Treaty. Several other countries also objected, but the U.S. pushed the treaty forward, effectively rewriting the post-war order in Northeast Asia, without considering China's interests. From that point onward, China has been firmly opposed to the San Francisco Peace Treaty, and it does not recognize that the Allied occupation of Japan is over, nor does it recognize the U.S. as the sole occupying power in Japan. From China's viewpoint, the San Francisco Peace Treaty is not legal, and it still has the right to station its army in part of Japan, and is entitled to the administration of Tokyo. As the United States became the only power that occupied Japan, and still has dozens of military bases in the country, Japan is literally a puppet of Washington, having no control over its military and politics. When the US needs Japan to counter China and Russia in Asia, Japan will inevitably revive the Imperial Japanese Army. That is why Shinzo Abe could revise Japan's constitution to normalize Japan as a political and military power gradually. Japan's foreign ministry even went so far as to argue, incorrectly from Japan's perspective, that the Cairo and Potsdam Declarations were merely political and not legally binding, even though Japan accepted them fully as part of its unconditional surrender in 1945. It is the root of many long-term tensions today. If the Chinese army is stationed in Japan, the new Japanese PM will never dare to link Taiwan to Japan's security. Beyond legal documents and geopolitics, there is the emotional dimension, something that continues to shape East Asian relations today. Millions of Chinese civilians died during the war. Events like the Nanjing Massacre, biological warfare, massive civilian executions, and the comfort women system still left scars, infuriating the Chinese society. Japan's erratic post-war reckoning with its wartime past, influenced partly by its Cold War mindset, remains one of the biggest obstacles in China-Japan relations. Suppose China had been one of the occupying powers, participated in the process of justice, and been involved in Japan's historical education and political transformation. In that case, Japan might have looked very different, not as anti-China as it does today. Here comes today's question: can China occupy Japan today? The answer is a little tricky, yes and no. It all depends on the power shift in East Asia. China has never given up its legal right to station its army in Japan, and it will not allow Japan to revive its imperialism to threat Asian people. When America's military power declines to a level that it can no longer maintain its military presence in Japan, and Japan poses a threat to Asia's safety, security, and stability, Beijing can execute its legal right to occupy part of Japan and station its army there. Nevertheless, the United States remains the most powerful force in the world. It is unlikely to withdraw from Japan unless necessary, making it a distant dream for China to occupy Japan in the foreseeable future. The door is still open but not wide.